welcome to Season 7, Episode 6, where I, Ariel, talk to Sam Nabi all about the project 1 Million Neighbours in Waterloo Region. And that's really all that I have to say on the matter. Thank you so much for listening, and please remember to subscribe, to rate and review us if that's something that your podcast app lets you do. I don't know where you're listening to this. Maybe it's on YouTube. Maybe you should just subscribe and press the like button. I have no idea. Do what you want with your life. Okay, on to the episode. I just want to ask you about 1 Million Neighbours. First, could you introduce yourself?
Awesome. My name is Sam Nabi. I'm the project coordinator for 1 Million Neighbours.
Awesome. And I just realized that I started without saying hello, listeners. I'm sitting down here with Sam Nabi, and yes, he is the coordinator for 1 Million Neighbours. So Sam, can you tell us about 1 Million Neighbours? What is it?
Yeah, 1 Million Neighbours, Waterloo Region, is a public advocacy effort. I don't know, every time I try to describe it, I describe it differently. But essentially, we're writing a report that envisions a future for Waterloo Region. Once we hit 1 million people. So we're at this point in the growth of our region. Waterloo Region is a mid-sized urban center about an hour and a half west of Toronto, and we've had this transition from, I would say, a small town mentality towards becoming a bigger city or collection of cities. Mm-hmm. And certain things that happen really challenge those long-held beliefs of Waterloo as a small town or Kitchener as a small town. And one of those things that really caused a shift in mentality, I think, is when we decided as a community to build our light rail transit. So we call it the ION. It was finished in 2019, and that was the first time that we had light rail going through, connecting our university campuses and our urban centers, and this seems like the kind of thing that a big city should be doing. And a lot of the pushback to that was, well, we don't want to be like Toronto. Or then there's people moving here from Toronto saying, oh, Kitchener-Waterloo has so much potential, and maybe we should think about how to develop as a more walkable, more urban city.
I never really knew about the origin story of the light rail transit, actually, and sort of how people react to technology like that.
Yeah, it's one angle of it. There was a lot of different kinds of debate about the LRT, but when you have a giant infrastructure project like that, it's going to bring up all of these other discussions and these other maybe hopes and fears in people's minds. So I say all of that just to say, as we inch towards this imaginary threshold of 1 million people, in the last few years, a lot of people have started talking about, okay, our region's at like 700,000 people right now. We have a diverse population. We have a manufacturing sector that is still kind of holding on. It's not the glory days of what it used to be, but we have major employers like Toyota and auto parts manufacturers, and then the whole tech sector has come in. We have a strong academic sector with the universities and Conestoga College. We are a community that's pretty connected to our agricultural history and local farmers. Mm-hmm. So I think there's a lot that's unique about us as a mid-sized city. And I think as we think about growing to 1 million, there are some fears that start to crop up about, what does growth mean? Does growth mean all of our problems that we currently are worried about are just going to get magnified? Mm-hmm. Does growth present some opportunities? So I think that's a narrative that people have been thinking about in the back of their mind.
Right, yeah.
But starting a couple years ago, the regional government came out with the regional chair's State of the Region address, I think is what she called it. And let me just back up and do that one again. So since 2022, which is when we had our last municipal election, there's been a renewed focus on this idea of 1 million, because we know we're going to reach it sooner rather than later. And the regional government itself has come out to say, we have this vision, it's called 1 million ready. We need to make sure we have, the right job supports for a strong economy. Maybe we need to expand the airport. There's certain things that staff are doing in their staff reports to orient decisions around this idea of 1 million people. And that's fine, but this vision from the regional government, it seemed a little limited. Okay, we can talk about the airport.
Yeah, it all sounds like these are very actionable ideas, but it doesn't really go into what do people actually think about it.
Yeah.
And how's it going to affect people who already live here.
Yeah. And then shortly after that, there was a press release that came out from some tech business leaders that they called Vision 1 Million. And they said, look, we've been looking around at our tech sector and tech sectors in neighboring cities, and here's what we think we need to do as we reach 1 million people. More incentives for people who work in tech jobs. Not surprising, coming from tech sector CEOs. Better transportation to Toronto. That's something a lot of people want. Something that they especially want so that they can get to their business meetings. We want a new hockey arena in downtown Kitchener. Certain things come up when you have certain priorities. They were looking for, certain landmark projects with prestige. And when they think of 1 million, that's what they're thinking of.
Right.
So there was a big gap here. We have government, we have business, and now where is the voice of community and where is the voice of the nonprofit sector? So that's where our vision came forward. We put our own spin on the name, which is 1 Million Neighbours. So the neighbors is really a key word here because as someone who's done a lot of advocacy at local government, the words we choose to use to describe our neighbors is really important to me. And sometimes you'll see politicians or media talking about taxpayers or citizens. And sometimes we say those words without even really thinking about them. But if you're saying, I'm here to represent taxpayers, well, who do you think of in your head when you think of taxpayers? It's usually property taxpayers and property owners, even though we know that renters pay property tax through their rent as well. But when you frame it in a certain way, you exclude people. When you say, I'm working for the citizens of Kitchener-Waterloo or Waterloo Region, okay, not everyone's a citizen. What about the permanent residents? What about the newcomers? Those are really important parts of our community as well. And I've landed on this word neighbors, which seems, maybe there's a better word, but this seems like the most inclusive recognition of the fact that, look, we're all neighbors. Yeah. We should all be neighborly, help each other, build relationships with each other, and see each other as neighbors instead of adversaries.
Yeah, it sounds very welcoming.
Yeah.
So did you originally come up with the idea for it, or is there anything like this anywhere else in Canada? Or North America or the world?
Yeah, I would say yes. I mean, in lots of cities, there are groups that try to be a broad, progressive umbrella for certain causes. So I think of organizations like Progress TO. I think there's one called Horizon, based out of Ottawa. So these are broad-based advocacy groups that are able to have influence in local elections and push for policies that they want to see that are not just in a single issue, but they represent a broad progressive vision.
Oh, okay.
So that was part of the inspiration behind 1 Million Neighbours. But the other thing was, this is technically a project of a group that I'm a part of called Hold the Line Waterloo Region. And Hold the Line exists to educate people and champion our countryside line, which is an urban growth boundary. So that protects our farmland. We have a lot of productive farms in Waterloo Region that are family farms that provide food to our local markets. Our St. Jacobs market is really important. Our Kitchener market is really important. These are core parts of life, even if you're a city dweller in Waterloo Region. You probably have a relationship with the farmers market. So anyway, that's the group that I'm a part of that we've spent years and years advocating to maintain some of these urban growth policies. And we've struggled in the last few years. I would say since, again, around 2022, it's been a real uphill struggle. And one of the parts of that is we realized the politicians were not taking us as seriously as before. Maybe because we're the same faces coming to meetings again and again, and they've started to tune us out. Maybe because they're getting more pressure from our conservative provincial government to override some of those environmental protections and farmland protections. And one of the ways that we need to reassert the importance of what we're advocating for is to build a broader coalition. If it's just the same environmentalists coming to council day after day, maybe it does start to get a little rote. But if we can come there and say, look, we're representing a broad coalition of healthcare concerns and newcomer support concerns and environmental concerns and labor concerns. And then all of these groups can support each other and realize that our struggles are interlinked. Hopefully we can be much more effective when it comes to advocacy. So this vision that we're creating, 1 Million Neighbours, is a document that is going to lay out all of the intersections that we're talking about. We have 15 different categories that we've grouped these recommendations into. And that part was really hard because actually deciding on categories when everything is interlinked is kind of antithetical to the whole idea. But we had to organize the document somehow.
Right. Where can I, is this document going to be, published? And who do you want to read it?
Yeah, the document will be published online on our website. So it's 1millionneighbours.ca. And this is in Canada, so it's .ca, and the neighbours does have a U. If there are people listening from other English-speaking places.
I'll link it.
Yeah, 1millionneighbours.ca. It's meant to be an advocacy tool. So yes, this report will go to local governments. We're going to send it to staff, and we're going to show up at local governments and say, look, you got to read this report, and we have a lot of recommendations for you. But there's also recommendations for the nonprofit sector and community groups themselves, saying, look, here's what we can do to collaborate with each other. And I think there's lessons here that definitely apply to other cities around the world. A lot of the issues that we're struggling against, whether it be high housing costs or homelessness or addictions, these issues are happening worldwide. So I'm not saying that we have the answers for everybody, but this is the vision that has come out of the bottom-up experience of our nonprofit sector in Waterloo Region.
Right. I was wondering, are some of those nonprofits that you're going to present this to, are they part of the 1 Million Neighbours group, or how do you sort of separate that?
I see 1 Million Neighbours as its own standalone project. Technically it's being administered by Hold the Line, as I mentioned, and I'm the coordinator for it, but we worked with 65 different nonprofits that showed up to roundtable discussions over the last 8 months, and there's more people and more organizations that I've been consulting with informally. So it really is supposed to be a collective effort. The issues that are in the report are ones that came from the ground up, from the feedback that we heard in the report. We didn't decide on any topics ahead of time. It was a very generative process. So hopefully when people think about the idea of Waterloo Region growing to 1 million people, then their mind jumps to this report. And okay, when we talk about 1 million, our idea is that the 1 Million Neighbours report will be in in front of their mind.
Right, the human ramifications of having so many people in such a small space.
And the fact is, these are the experts, the people who are doing, like I said, refugee support or on-the-ground encampment support, addiction support, healthcare providers, recreational programmers at community centers. These are the people who are every day meeting their neighbors and providing them with services that are what makes life worth living. So normally when you hear about an issue like population growth being framed in the media, they'll turn to academics or business advisors or politicians. Right. And my hope is that we can insert ourselves as the voice of the nonprofit sector, saying, look, this is another perspective that really needs to be taken seriously.
Right. Can I ask you just to give us a little bit of a taste of what might be in the document?
Yeah, absolutely.
What are some of the concerns that 1 Million Neighbours has? What's been sort of brought up, and what are you thinking about? Yeah,
so the work of the report was less about identifying concerns and more about projecting a positive vision for the future. So that was a really freeing experience, I think, for a lot of the participants to say, I know you're dealing day to day with all of the things that you have to, all the fires you have to put out, all the things you have to deal with. But we're going to envision a future where everyone is thriving. The keywords we used were abundance, inclusion, and resilience. Wow. So, that was a loose framework for how we want to see the future. So what's an inclusive, resilient, abundant future look like? A lot of people's responses centered around certain public spaces and public institutions. So we heard a lot about the importance of libraries, parks, schools, and community centers. So if you start there, you think about neighbors, you think about your neighborhood. Do you have a good school? Do you have a good community center? Is there programming there every day? Do you have childcare? Do you have an easy walk to school? Do you have an easy commute to work? Can your kids actually get to school independently? Is it unsafe to drive them there? So I think that's where a lot of the discussion started, is in your immediate neighborhood. As you wake up, as you go around your day, connectivity was super important, whether that meant abundant public transit or good sidewalks and trails. It's funny, when you ask people to imagine the future, an ideal future, very few participants were talking about, I have a big screen TV and a large backyard and a barbecue and a cottage. Their mind went to the public realm. Their mind went to, I step out my front door and I meet my neighbors and I have my community garden, and they see themselves in relationship with their neighbors.
Wow.
So, maybe it was a self-selected group because these are all nonprofit people anyway, but it was really inspiring to see that when you ask people just a general question about the future, it doesn't jump to me and my personal life. It jumps to me being in community.
Right. I think the idea of the future is like it's going to be a shared future. It is a larger concept than just my personal future.
Yeah.
So I think already people were kind of geared towards that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really cool.
A lot of the organizations we were involved with also were refugee support and newcomer support organizations, and so there's some specific language in the vision that comes out of that, such as, we really need to solve the issue with people who come to Canada with credentials from other countries. They're professionals in their field, but then they can't work in their field, and we need them in the healthcare profession, in engineering, whatever they're coming to this country with, and they feel like there's a barrier, and that maybe they have to get recertified or go back to school, even though they've already gone to school.
Right.
And, that's a huge barrier. We have a big problem with what we call onward migration. So, yes, we welcome a lot of immigrants, and they make our communities better. They make our communities more resilient. Immigrants are more likely to start businesses and employ people. But we also have onward migration, so people actually don't stay here. They're leaving within 5 years, and they're going to another country.
Oh, wow.
So they come here and they experience these insurmountable barriers where they decide, you know what, I can't get certified here, but I can go work in the US and they'll accept my diploma. So we need to fix that. And what that looks like in our vision is newcomers arrive and they're able to work in their field, and they don't have onerous recertification processes, and they're able to have professional networking and professional development and leadership opportunities. And this is a normal part of life in our ideal future.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I would want to live in a future where it's easy to move somewhere else, and that not just meaning, like I can afford to move somewhere else and I can afford the rent, but then also, like I am accepted as an expert in my field, whatever that is, and sort of respected as such, right? Even if maybe I don't completely have the best grasp of the language yet. So.
Yeah, language was a huge one too. So kind of coming at it from two different directions. Having services like broadly anything that you access, whether that be arts and culture, sports programming, trying to talk to your kid's teacher at school, thinking about services being communicated in multiple languages. So yes, we have English and French as the official languages of Canada, but also if you look at our community, we have a large Spanish-speaking population, large Arabic-speaking population, large Hindi-speaking population. I'm trying to think what the other major ones are. But
I know there's lots of little ones.
There's lots of little ones, but if you see even a plaque on a statue, why can't that be translated into multiple languages to meet the needs of the neighborhood? And really doing that on a neighborhood level makes a lot of sense based on where there are concentrations of people that speak different languages. So that's the translation. And then the other side of that is interpretation. So if you experiencing a barrier accessing a government service, for example, you're like, I want to pay my water bill, but English isn't my first language. There should be interpretation services. So translation from the one side and interpretation from the other side, which interpretation services are provided by groups like the KW Multicultural Center, but, the need for them far outpasses what they're able to provide.
I could imagine, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to actually ask you a little bit about the groups that are involved with 1 Million Neighbours and sort of what it was like working with, I think you said 65 different groups of people. That's a lot of people to coordinate. That's a lot of information to handle. Sort of how did you find that experience, I guess?
Well, it was a lot. It was very exciting. So I really appreciated getting face-to-face time around a literal table talking with people about this. And I think the format in which we did the discussions was super conducive to that, because I didn't want to, have a Zoom meeting where people were half paying attention. And, there are different ways that you can do public engagement, but we did small group roundtables. So there was about 8 to 15 people per session. We did about 8 sessions, and having people literally sit around a table. And the first thing that we did was we established some sense of trust. And that was what I wanted to do as an icebreaker, was say, look, we're all here, we're all experts. Mm-hmm. We may not have met each other. We might be coming from very different angles of what we focus on. But let's just recognize, let's spend 20 minutes and go around the table and talk about what we do and what's important to us in our organization. And everyone was there representing an organization as well. So we had a bit of a threshold for that, to just show that, you're here not talking just on behalf of yourself, but with the wisdom of the organization that you represent.
Right.
So we started with that. People are coming from environmental conservation groups, or like a citizens taxpayer lobby group, or a cycling advocacy group, or a housing group, or an addiction support service. Right. And everyone was coming around the table realizing that they actually have a lot in common. So that was the real joy for me, was trying to pull together as many different groups as possible that all have their own areas of expertise. And then once the ball gets rolling, I just take a step back and take notes, because it's really amazing to see someone say, you know what, I'm part of a housing organization, but one of the other things we're really dealing with is addictions in our supportive housing offering, for example. And then the person who's working with addictions in a different way, in maybe a healthcare setting, can jump off that and say, oh, actually, we can approach the same solution from different angles.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of these problems are intertangled and intertwined, and so, mesh together. It makes sense that these organizations would be able to work together towards creating a more sustainable future, just in terms of organizational sustainability. Yeah,
and it's really hard because a lot of the funding models are siloed. Right. So I used to volunteer on the board of a supportive housing organization. So they provide housing for people with mental health and addictions needs. And all the funding was coming from housing, like a housing bucket, which is fine. There was some subsidies being provided so that these residents only had to pay the disability support limit for their shelter, which was about $500, $400 or $500 a month. I'm getting that number right. But anyway, it was subsidized housing. So we get some money for the housing. But we have people that need 24/7 someone in the building to support with mental health and addictions issues.
Right.
And we don't really have sustainable funding for that. And so it was cobbled together year after year. We're trying to fund these positions of support workers that are helping these residents. And, we could maybe have gotten money from the Ministry of Health for that. But Ministry of Health has a whole different process, and you kind of need to be a bigger organization to qualify for some of those dollars. Meanwhile, the only ones that we were getting were the dollars from the housing bucket, and we're not allowed to pay those staff with the dollars from the housing bucket. And so, it's the solutions are not meeting the moment when you have these funding buckets that are restrictive and not giving nonprofits the freedom that they need to actually serve the people.
Right. Yeah. And sort of in an ideal future, that wouldn't be a problem because people would be working together.
One of the most interesting things that came out of these discussions was a whole section on funding reform for nonprofits. So there was a report that was done recently by the Ontario Nonprofit Network that tracked how many hours nonprofits spend writing grant applications. and spending time out of their day that they could be using to actually deliver their programming to just actually write the grant applications. And they found that if you value the time that they spent writing those applications and compare it against the funding that they actually receive, nonprofits on average are spending three times as much time. How do I phrase this? If you take a look at how much time people are spending writing grant applications versus the money that they receive, the value of the grants that they're receiving is actually far less than the hours that they spend writing the grant applications. Because you're writing like 3 grant applications and you only get one of them. And so there's all this time and money being wasted in the nonprofit sector with this honestly archaic system of, okay, you got to write for grants and you got to reapply every year and you know, prove that you're using the money effectively. And there needs to be accountability, but also there's a lot of resources being wasted and not actually going to people. So one of the ideas that has come up in our discussions is the idea that nonprofits should band together and decide for themselves, okay, what is the program that we want to see funded? Can we collaborate and say, here's a plan for housing for Waterloo Region for 5 years. And if we're going to ask for our dream budget for this housing, you know, let's say all the supportive housing organizations get together and agree on a vision. Let's decide it. Let's see what needs to be funded. And then they say, all right, look, we need X million dollars over the next 5 years to make this vision happen, and we'll solve homelessness. Now, who wants to fund us? Federal government, do you want to give us some money? Provincial government, do you want to give us some money? Tech sector, do you want to give us some money? Flipping that whole system on its head where maybe the nonprofits should actually be the leaders in developing this idea of how things get funded versus the funding pots being decided by philanthropists or governments. Yeah,
that kind of reminds me of the way that there's, you know, a construction project that needs to be done, and then all the like different engineering firms or construction firms have to put bids on it, right?
Exactly.
So that seems sort of more along those lines.
Yeah.
And I think would be very empowering for those nonprofits that are involved.
Yeah. So, you know, that's we're projecting into the future to our utopian vision, and that's what we're seeing. You know, I realize that's a far step from where we are today. There's a lot of issues with organizational capacity, and, you know, everyone's burnt out in the nonprofit sector, and they're not getting paid enough. And so I'm not saying that we need to put all this work on the nonprofit sector right now, but that's the vision that we're showing for a future where we can grow. We have 1 million people in the region, and we've solved all these problems, you know? Of course we're going to need some new structures to make that happen.
Yeah. This is maybe related to the idea of utopia, but also maybe a slight aside to it. But I'm wondering, what keeps you hopeful in this time of rising fascism and political turmoil, and working on this document with a bunch of our neighbors? I mean, what keeps you going throughout the process?
This process was really hopeful for me because we're describing a future vision that we think is actually achievable, and we realize that we have so much talent and knowledge and skills in like I said, the 65 organizations that participated. But not only them, you know, we identified 500 organizations that exist that were like, you know, once you start just listing, okay, that was the first question. Who are all the people in Waterloo Region working in the nonprofit space? And that could be anything from like the United Way, which is very well resourced, to there's an organization called the Red Maple Society, or I might be getting the full name wrong, but Red Maple Organization. And it's a nonprofit centered around providing social opportunities and charitable events for seniors in the Chinese community. Oh. And, you know, very specific.
Yeah.
But we're all doing our part in our communities, and it's based on relationship. And so that in itself was very inspiring for me. So we're all getting together and we're building this vision for the future. We're seeing what we have in common. If we all row in the same direction, we could actually make some real change. And that was a huge shift in perspective from, I would say, the last 5 years of advocacy that I was doing with Hold the Line and other groups, where we were basically responding to destructive policies that were coming down from the province. We're saying like, okay, you know, Doug Ford's trying to get rid of the green belt. Let's mobilize and protest. Yeah. Or, you know, they're trying to snap up the farmland to build an unspecified industrial site. Let's get out and protest. And those protests were really important and galvanizing, but if we're always responding to the bad stuff that's happening, then we're not leaving space for hope and for actually producing this vision that we want to see in the world.
Yeah. Like the visioning process itself, in the tech sector, they will call it blue skying, right?
Yeah.
You just put in your idea, no matter how unachievable it seems right now.
Yeah.
But building the relationships between people seems to be the way to sort of almost affect this kind of change.
Definitely, because I think I'll say on a bit of a tangent, I'm also a musician, and one thing that I hear in the music scene is people who are very talented and maybe young and emerging in their arts career, and I see them maybe organize a concert or put out an album, and they'll say, you know what, like, there's just nothing in this city for music. Like, I'm on a career path that I'm going to blow up and I'm going to have millions of fans, and I need to go to Toronto or New York or LA or Atlanta, and there's just nothing happening in Kitchener-Waterloo. There's nothing happening in Cambridge. And it's not true, like, there's lots of DIY independent music scenes happening here, but they're not very well connected and they're not very well communicated. And so when you feel lonely and when you feel isolated, there's this sense of like, oh, my city doesn't care about me. I'm going to go to somewhere where I think I'll be appreciated. But then once that person starts meeting other musicians and getting invited into the scene and going to house shows and collaborating with other local musicians, I see a change in that perspective, and I see a lot more hopefulness. Even if you think that things could be different, even if you think that where we're at is not where we should be, I see those people now say, oh, I'm going to organize a festival. I'm going to have a festival here in Kitchener. And that shift in perspective is like, if you don't feel like your city loves you back, you're going to push it away even more. Versus every time you invite someone else in, you're reinforcing those relationships and you're making a stronger community.
Wow. I think maybe for our listeners, if anybody wanted to maybe get something like this started, what advice would you have for them?
My advice would be humble. Know that even if you're interested in lots of different domains and subject matter, you do not have all the answers. As someone who has done political organizing before, I saw this need. I'm like, look, we're too narrow. We need to broaden our tent. We need to bring in labor. We need to bring in, healthcare. These are areas that I haven't been involved in personally. And I know that I don't have the answers. So then sometimes you're going to reach out to people and they're just not going to respond to your email because they're like, who is this person? We've never worked with them before. But when you're trying to build a new relationship, sometimes it can be tricky. But I would just say start where you are, start with your community and branch out from there. Everybody knows someone who knows someone, right? And it will take time. This whole process took 8 months because it took 8 months for some of those relationships to come to fruition. If I said that I wanted to have this all happen all at once, I wouldn't have had the connections.
Right.
So, give yourself time and really lean on the knowledge that other people will bring to the process. And that also comes with not prescribing an outcome too quickly. Right. I knew that we wanted to write a report. I knew that it was this vision for the future, but I didn't go in and start making the categories for the report right on day one. We wanted to see what themes emerged. We wanted to make sure that people were being represented. And then when I sent out some of the drafts, I heard feedback saying, hey, you really didn't focus on early childhood education and youth empowerment. And I was like, okay, maybe there's a gap. And then I put out another version, and I had combined the climate change and environmental visions into one section. And then I heard from some people saying, you know what, I really think climate justice needs its own part, and I don't see it being represented enough. And, everyone will always have their priorities that they're going to push for, but as an organizer, you're going to have to try to create something where everyone sees themselves at least represented somehow. It's not about either or. I truly feel like there was not a lot of conflict in this process. Like,
I was going to ask you about that,
everyone was pretty much rowing in the same direction. And, there's definitely some decisions that have to be made about when you get into the details on a topic like free transit. There's some people that are all for it and some people that say it's actually not the best way to do transit. But those are like small policy differences. If we take a look at the big vision, keeping in mind those ideals of inclusion, resilience, abundance, and trying to stay away from some of the like domain-specific buzzwords that people like to use, then we get people describing what they want in new words and in a different way, and then they realize that they're going to do it in a way that also includes these other organizations that maybe they haven't worked with in a long time.
Okay. While you were talking, I was thinking about the fact that, relationships take time. I mean, you can't go from, complete strangers to working together in the span of like just an evening, like where you first met each other, right? And so the idea that, it's going to take a while. Mm-hmm. It's going to take, you might not feel like you have the time and that things might be like super urgent. You need to respond to it right now. But that's part of the way that it is proactive and not reactive. Mm-hmm. That proactivity allows for that time.
Yeah. And I think, especially in smaller cities, which, like I mentioned at the beginning, we're trying to transition from thinking of Waterloo Region as a small town into more of a bigger city. But once you have those relationships, I think you do have to avoid getting in the trap of like picking apart small differences. So, there are lots of different supportive housing organizations. Some of them have a zero tolerance policy for drug use. Some of them have a harm reduction policy where they allow drugs. These are differences, and they have criticisms both ways about how to handle a resident's situation. And the truth is probably that different people need a different framework. So if we don't let ourselves get bogged down by criticizing each other in those ways and think about that we all have more in common than we have differences, then that's something that I try to keep in mind.
Yeah, keeping in mind those shared values and goals that you're working towards. It's like, the idea of, how we deal with people with addictions in housing is not really what we're here to talk about. So
it shouldn't be a zero-sum game. I know it does feel like a zero-sum game when you're competing for the same pots of money and the funding system is set up in this way, but that's why we also have recommendations about changing the funding system.
For some people, I think it would be far less scary for them to know that, somebody else is already doing this and you can join their efforts.
Yeah.
Other people would just love to start something themselves because they are the kind of go-getters who can be on all the time, and that's amazing.
Mm-hmm. And if you are the type of person that wants to just go and start your own thing, that's totally a creative energy that is needed as well, but you will run into, eventually, someone else who's doing a very similar thing. And at that point, you have to make a decision about whether you see them as a competition or whether you see ways that you can collaborate.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much for talking with me today, Sam. This is amazing. Is there anything else you wanted to tell me about the 1 Million Neighbours report?
I just want to reiterate that 1 Million Neighbours is not an organization. It's a project, and it's intentionally meant to be fluid and nimble. And once we do this report, it's out in the world, and it's there for any of our members or anyone in the world to take and use for their own purposes. So it's an advocacy tool. We've collected a lot of knowledge, but what happens next? It's an open question. Hopefully nonprofits use this to advocate for themselves and advocate for us more broadly at budget time. Hopefully they use it to identify maybe gaps in their own organization where they're like, we could collaborate more with other people in this way or that way. But we're not prescribing an outcome out of this. We're just saying, look, this is the future that we could have. And we're not prescribing who should do what. We're not saying the federal government needs to give us $1 million for this or that.
That would be nice.
Although that would be nice. But I think we need to envision our future beyond just, I need X amount of dollars from the government for this program. Yes, there needs to be government partnership. There needs to be nonprofit partnership. There probably needs to be business partnership in some of this as well. But how we all come together and achieve it is kind of an open question, and I'm excited to see what other people do when they run with this report.
Me too. So I think you said this already, but when does the report come out? Like, when's the official report going to be uploaded to the website?
Yeah,
What's sort of your estimation?
we're hoping spring, summer 2025.
Okay.
I'm gonna put it vague there because we don't have a launch event yet, but I'm working on that. If people are very curious and it's not out yet, you can go to 1millionneighbours.ca. We have some blog posts that are already up there that have sneak peeks of different parts of the report, and
Right.
You can also contact us through that website if you're really interested, and I'll send you a link to the Google Doc.
Excellent. Well, thank you again. This has been amazing.
Thank you. Really proud to be a part of this podcast and excited to share this story with all the other stories that you're collecting.
Thank you for listening to Solarpunk Presents, a podcast hosted and produced by Ariel, Kroon, and Christina de la Rocha.
The audio for this episode was recorded in part on the traditional territory of the neutral Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples.
And in Germany. The opening and closing music for this podcast is Water Cooler Gang by Monkey Warhol, available for use under the Creative Commons Attribution 4.0 International License.
Don't forget to support us on Patreon at patreon.com/solarpunkpresents.
Every little bit helps us keep bringing you discussions and interviews.
Until the next episode, keep dreaming.
And stay solarpunk.